I wasn't planning on telling this story. Honestly, I wasn't sure if anyone would even believe me. But some things are too big to stay silent about. So if you're watching this, consider it both a warning and a confession. And hey, if this video doesn't disappear overnight, maybe you can leave a like and subscribe. It might be the only way the story survives. Let's go back to where it all started on a night that should have been just like any other. It all started one lazy weekend. I was flipping through some old forums looking for interesting things to read. You know how it is when boredom strikes you, start exploring the weird corners of the internet. That's when I stumbled across a post titled, "The Hollow Veil Project, Enter If You Dare." Sounds ridiculous, right? But the title grabbed my attention, and against my better judgment, I clicked on it. The post was simple, just a brief introduction about an abandoned asylum located deep in the woods outside of a small town, and how it was tied to secret government experiments. There were links to photos, a few cryptic messages, and one set of GPS coordinates. Now, I've always been curious about abandoned places. There's something about peeling wallpaper, broken windows, and the silence of forgotten spaces that sends chills down my spine. So I thought, why not? The asylum was about a 4-hour drive from where I lived. I packed some basic supplies, flashlight, batteries, snacks, and a map. Yeah, a physical map. You can't trust GPS in the middle of nowhere. I set off in the afternoon, and as I drove, the scenery changed. The busy streets turned into empty highways, then narrow, winding roads surrounded by dense forest. The sun was setting by the time I reached the coordinates. The building stood in eerie silence, half covered by overgrown vines. It was massive, 4 stories tall, with shattered windows that seemed to stare back at me. I parked my car a safe distance away, grabbed my backpack, and stepped out. The air was cold, and the forest around me was eerily quiet. No birds, no rustling leaves, just silence. I approached the main entrance, my flashlight cutting through the growing darkness. The doors were ajar, hanging off their hinges, as if they'd been forced open years ago. The first thing I noticed was the smell, damp, musty, with a hint of something metallic. The floor was littered with broken tiles and scraps of paper. My flashlight revealed faded murals on the walls, remnants of a time when this place might have been full of life. But then I saw something odd. One of the murals wasn't like the others. It looked recent. The colors were brighter, the paint seemed fresh, and the image was unsettling, a human figure with no face, surrounded by swirling patterns that seemed to draw you in. You couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I turned a corner and found a hallway lined with doors, each labeled with numbers. Most were locked or boarded up, but one stood slightly open. I pushed it with my foot, and it creaked loudly, echoing down the hall. Inside was a small room with a single metal bed and a desk covered in scattered papers. On the desk, I found something strange striped with the words, "Hollow Veil Project Classified." My hands were shaking as I opened the folder. Inside were pages of handwritten notes, diagrams, and what looked like patient profiles. One name stood out. Subject 13, status missing. The notes described experiments involving neurological manipulation and perception distortion. I didn't understand most of the jargon, but one phrase sent a chill down my spine. Subjects report seeing entities beyond the veil. Flipped through the pages, finding sketches of shadowy figures, each labeled with names like Observer, Lurker, and Harbinger. The sketches felt alive, like they were watching me. Suddenly, I heard a noise behind me, a faint shuffling sound, like someone dragging their feet. My heart raced as I spun around, flashlight trembling in my hand. The hallway was empty. I told myself it was just my imagination, but something about this place felt off. I decided to keep going, following the hallway deeper into the asylum. The air grew colder, and my flashlight started flickering. As I reached the end of the hall, I found a staircase leading down. A faint humming sound came from below, rhythmic and mechanical. Against every instinct screaming at me to leave, I descended the stairs. The basement was darker than I expected, and the humming grew louder. I followed it to a massive steel door, marked with the same words as the folder. Hollow Veil Project. The door was ajar, revealing a room filled with equipment that looked like it belonged in a sci-fi movie. Monitors flashed with static and wires snaked across the floor. In the center of the room was a large glass chamber, glowing faintly. Inside the chamber was something, a figure, humanoid but not quite human, its features blurred and shifting as if it couldn't fully exist in our reality. My chest tightened as I approached, and then the monitors flickered, displaying one word: leave. My instincts told me to turn back, but my curiosity had already dragged me too far. The glowing chamber pulsed faintly, casting an eerie light across the room. I stepped closer, my heart pounding with each step. The figure inside seemed to shift, its form flickering like static on an old TV. The monitors around me suddenly flickered again. This time they displayed a single phrase: "You shall dant." A cold chill ran down my spine. My flashlight flickered and then died completely, leaving me in the faint glow of the chamber. I reached out to touch the glass, my fingers trembling. Just as I was about to make contact, a deafening alarm blared, piercing through the silence. The chamber began to hum louder, the glow intensifying. I stumbled back, shielding my eyes, as the figure inside grew sharper, more defined. It wasn't human. Its elongated limbs, shifting eyes, and translucent skin made that clear. Then it opened its eyes. I don't know how to describe what I saw in that moment. Its eyes weren't like ours. They weren't just looking at me. They were looking through me, peeling away everything I thought I was. I felt exposed, like every secret I'd ever buried was laid bare. The alarm kept blaring, and the chamber began to crack. Thin lines spread across the glass, as if it were under immense pressure. I panicked, stumbling back toward the steel door. Suddenly, the monitors flickered again, showing another message. Run. I didn't need to be told twice. I bolted up the stairs, my legs trembling with every step. The sound of shattering glass echoed behind me, followed by an unearthly guttural roar that shook the walls. As I reached the main floor, the entire building seemed to shudder. Dust and debris rained down from the ceiling. I sprinted toward the exit, the roar growing louder and more menacing. Just as I reached the front doors, they slammed shut on their own. I was trapped. I turned to look behind me, and my blood ran cold. A shadow moved at the far end of the hall, too large to be human. It moved unnaturally, its limbs twisting and bending as it approached. I ducked into the nearest room, slamming the door behind me and pressing my back against it. My breathing was ragged, and my hands shook as I fumbled to turn on my phone's flashlight. The room was small and empty, except for a desk and a dusty mirror. I looked at my reflection, and for a moment, I thought I saw something else staring back. A figure standing behind me. I spun around, but the room was empty. My mind was playing tricks on me, or maybe something worse. The shadow outside the door stopped moving, and for a moment, there was silence. Then, the doorknob began to turn slowly. I grabbed the desk, dragging it in front of the door. Whatever was out there wasn't getting in without a fight. The knob stopped turning, and I heard footsteps retreating down the hall. I waited for what felt like hours before I dared to move again. I pushed the desk aside and crept back into the hallway. The asylum was eerily silent now, as if it were holding its breath. I knew I couldn't leave yet. Whatever this place was hiding, I needed to find out. I followed the hallway to a set of double doors labeled archives. Inside, rows of filing cabinets stretched into the darkness, their drawers slightly open, as if someone had been here recently. I riffled through the drawers, pulling out folders and papers. Most were unreadable, full of strange symbols and diagrams. But one folder caught my eye. It was labeled Subject 13, Phase 3 Initiation. The contents were horrifying. They detailed experiments meant to enhance human perception by exposing subjects to something called the veil. The notes described how most subjects went insane, unable to cope with what they saw. Only Subject 13 had survived. But the final entry was chilling. Subject 13 has breached containment. Termination is advised. As I read the file, the lights in the room flickered. My stomach dropped when I realized I wasn't alone. A faint shadow moved across the wall, too fast to belong to anything natural. I froze, clutching the folder tightly. The shadow moved closer, and I heard a low, guttural sound, almost like breathing. "Who's there?" I whispered, my voice shaking. There was no response, just the sound of footsteps approaching. I backed away, bumping into one of the filing cabinets. The folder slipped from my hands, scattering papers across the floor. Suddenly, the shadow lunged toward me. I dove to the side, crashing into the cabinet as the thing slammed into the spot where I'd just been standing. I scrambled to my feet and ran, not caring where I was going as long as it was away from that thing. I found myself in another large room, this one filled with strange machines and screens. The air was thick with an electric hum, and the walls were covered in more of those swirling patterns. In the center of the room was a table with a large object draped in a sheet. I hesitated before pulling the sheet away, revealing what looked like a human body, or at least, it used to be. The body was twisted and deformed, its eyes replaced by dark voids, and its skin covered in strange markings. A tag around its wrist read, Subject 13 terminated. But as I stared, I realized it wasn't completely still. Its chest moved faintly, as if it were still breathing. The monitors around me lit up with one final message. You have seen too much. The hum grew louder, and the room began to shake. I turned to run, but the door slammed shut behind me, trapping me inside. The shaking intensified, and the hum grew so loud it felt like it was reverberating inside my skull. I stumbled back from the table, my eyes darting between the monitors and the figure on the table. It wasn't just breathing anymore. Its fingers twitched, and its head shifted slightly. I had to get out. I ran to the door, yanking on the handle with all my strength, but it wouldn't budge. My heart pounded as I turned back toward the room. The lights flickered and the thing on the table sat up. Its movements were unnatural, jerky, like a puppet being yanked by invisible strings. It turned its head toward me, its empty voids for eyes locking onto mine. I felt a wave of cold wash over me, and for a moment, I couldn't move. Then, it spoke. Its voice wasn't like anything I'd ever heard. It was layered, as if multiple people were speaking at once, and the words didn't just enter my ears, they echoed in my mind. "What are you here?" it asked. I stammered, barely able to form words. I found the files. I needed to know the truth. "Truth is not for you," it replied, its tone cold and final. The monitors flickered again, displaying images of the asylum's history. Black and white photos showed rows of patients strapped to beds, doctors in lab coats standing over them with cold, detached expressions. The captions told a horrific story of experiments meant to transcend human perception. I realized then that this wasn't just about the asylum. Whatever this hollow veil project was, it wasn't confined to this building. It was bigger. Something global, something ancient. The figure rose from the table, its distorted body standing unnaturally tall. It took a step toward me, and I stumbled back, pressing myself against the door. "You were not meant to see," it said, its voice shaking the room. "The veil exists to protect your kind. To reveal it is to invite destruction." The monitors changed again, showing images of massive structures, pyramids, temples, ancient ruins. Lines connected them across a glowing map, forming patterns that made my head spin. Each location was marked with a single word: gateway. "What are these?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Portals to the beyond," it replied. "Your kind used to know them. You forgot. Now you fear." The hum grew louder, and the air in the room seemed to vibrate. The figure raised an arm, pointing at me. "Leave, or be consumed." Before I could respond, the monitors flashed one final message. The door behind me flew open, and I didn't hesitate. I bolted out of the room, my footsteps echoing through the empty hallways. The asylum seemed alive now, its walls shifting and groaning, as if it were trying to trap me. As I ran, I heard the sound of heavy, uneven footsteps behind me. It was following me. I turned corner after corner, my flashlight barely illuminating the path ahead. The air grew colder, and my breath came in ragged gasps. I knew I couldn't stop, not if I wanted to survive. I burst into a large open room that looked like an old operating theater. The walls were lined with rusted equipment, and a single overhead light flickered weakly. "Over here," a voice called. I froze. Turning toward the sound, a man stepped out from the shadows, dressed in a tattered coat and holding a flashlight. His face was lined with age, but his eyes were sharp and alert. "Who are you?" I asked, my voice shaking. "No time," he replied, grabbing my arm. "If you want to live, follow me." I didn't have much choice. He led me through a series of hidden passages, the footsteps behind us growing louder. After what felt like an eternity, we emerged into a small room filled with old computers and stacks of paper. The man slammed the door shut and bolted it, then turned to me. "You shouldn't be here," he said, his tone grave. "Yeah, I've been getting that a lot," I replied, trying to catch my breath. "What's going on? What is this place?" He sighed, running a hand through his graying hair. "This is what's left of the Hollow Veil project. It was supposed to be shut down years ago, but things don't stay buried for long." He explained that the project had started decades ago as an attempt to pierce the boundaries of human perception. Scientists believed there was another layer to reality, something hidden just beyond what we could see. They called it the veil. But when they found a way to look beyond it, they didn't just observe, they attracted attention. "The veil isn't just a barrier," he said. "It's a warning. Something on the other side doesn't want us here." "What about the thing in the chamber?" I asked. He hesitated. "That was Subject 13, the only one who survived the experiments, if you can call that surviving." Before I could ask more, the room began to shake. Dust fell from the ceiling, and a low guttural roar echoed through the halls. "They've found us," he said, his voice grim. He grabbed a bag from under one of the desks and handed me a device that looked like a small tablet. "Take this. It has everything you need to expose the truth, but you have to leave now." "What about you?" I asked. He shook his head. I've been running long enough. It's your turn now." The door behind us buckled under the force of something slamming into it. He pushed me toward a hidden passage and slammed the panel shut behind me. I ran, clutching the device tightly. The passage led to a hidden exit, and I emerged into the cold night air. I didn't stop running until I reached my car. As I drove away, I looked back at the asylum. The building seemed to shimmer for a moment, then collapsed into itself, vanishing as if it had never been there. I drove for hours, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. My mind was racing with questions. What had I just witnessed? Who was that man? And most importantly, what was on this device he'd given me? Finally, I pulled over at a small, empty gas station off the highway. The place looked like it hadn't seen a customer in years. I parked in the shadow of the building, turned off the engine, and locked the doors. My hands were shaking as I pulled out the tablet. The screen flickered to life, displaying a password prompt. At first, I panicked. I had no idea what the password could be. Then I remembered the folder I'd found in the asylum, Hollow Veil Project. I typed it in, and the device unlocked. The files were a mix of documents, videos, and diagrams. The first file I opened was labeled Project Overview. The document described the origins of the Hollow Veil Project. It had been started in the 1960s as part of a covert operation involving several global powers. The goal was simple but terrifying: to breach the veil and access the hidden reality beyond it. But the experiments had gone horribly wrong. The first attempts involved using test subjects, volunteers, prisoners, even children. Most of them didn't survive. Those who did were either driven insane or changed. One phrase stood out to me: exposure to the veil destabilizes the human mind. Prolonged contact results in irreversible cognitive and physical mutations. The document went on to explain that Subject 13 was the only person who had survived direct exposure for more than a few seconds. The scientists believed he had formed a connection with the entities beyond the veil. And now, he, or it, was free. I was still reading when I noticed something out of the corner of my eye. A black SUV had pulled into the gas station parking lot, its headlights off. My heart sank. I stuffed the tablet into my bag, started the car, and peeled out of the lot. The SUV's engine roared to life, and it started following me. The chase lasted for what felt like an eternity. I swerved onto back roads, my tires skidding on gravel as I tried to loose them. But they were relentless, staying right on my tail. Finally, I spotted an old logging road and took a sharp turn, plunging into the dense forest. The SUV hesitated for a moment before following me. The road was narrow and winding, the trees looming like silent sentinels on either side. Suddenly, my car hit a pothole and the engine sputtered. I slammed the brakes, jumped out, and ran into the woods, clutching the bag with the tablet. The SUV stopped and I heard the doors open. Footsteps followed me, crunching on the forest floor. I ran until my lungs burned, ducking behind a massive tree to catch my breath. The footsteps grew louder, then stopped. "Over here," a voice whispered. I turned, startled, to see the man from the asylum. He was crouched behind a fallen log, motioning for me to follow him. "How did you find me?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "No time," he replied. "They're closing in. We have to move." He led me through the forest to a hidden bunker, its entrance camouflaged with moss and leaves. Inside, it was cramped but well stocked with equipment, computers, maps, and boxes of supplies. "This is where I've been hiding?" he said, locking the door behind us. "You're lucky I found you before they did." "Who are they?" I asked. "The Watchers," he replied. "They're the ones who kept the project going, even after it was supposed to be shut down. They'll do whatever it takes to keep the Veil's secrets." Over the next few hours, he explained everything. The Watchers weren't just a rogue group. They were part of a larger network spanning governments, corporations, and secret societies. Their goal was to control the knowledge of the Veil and use it for their own purposes. "They think the Veil is a source of power," he said, "but they don't understand the danger. The entities on the other side, they're not our allies. They see us as insignificant." I pulled out the tablet and showed him the files. His eyes widened as he scanned through them. "This is it," he said, "the proof we need, but we can't release it yet, not like this." "Not?" I asked. "Because if we do, they'll shut it down before anyone can see it. We need to broadcast it everywhere, all at once. The world needs to know the truth." Over the next few days, we worked together to compile the files, creating a comprehensive report that detailed the horrors of the Hollow Veil project. We encoded the data, preparing it for a mass upload to multiple platforms. But we knew the Watchers wouldn't stop hunting us. On the night we were set to release the files, the bunker's alarms went off. Cameras outside showed several black SUVs pulling up, their headlights piercing the darkness. "They've found us," he said, grabbing a weapon from a hidden compartment. "What do we do?" I asked, panic rising in my chest. "We hold them off long enough to send the files," he replied. As he began the upload, the door shook under the force of someone trying to break it down. I grabbed a crowbar and stood beside him, ready to defend the bunker. The door burst open and chaos erupted. The door crashed open, and the first figure stepped through, dressed in black tactical gear, their face obscured by a mask. Before I could react, the man from the asylum, my unlikely ally, fired a warning shot. The intruder dove for cover, shouting something I couldn't make out. "Keep them out," he yelled, his voice cutting through the chaos. I grabbed the crowbar, my hands trembling, and took a defensive position near the console where the upload progress bar crawled forward at an agonizingly slow pace. More figures poured into the bunker, their movements calculated and efficient. My ally fired again, forcing them back, but it was clear we were outnumbered. "Cover me!" he shouted, darting toward a second console. I nodded, though I wasn't sure how much help I'd be. The room filled with deafening noise, gunfire, the sound of heavy boots on metal, and the hum of the equipment as the upload continued. I swung the crowbar at anything that moved toward me, adrenaline numbing my fear. Suddenly, the lights flickered, and the air in the bunker grew icy. The intruders hesitated, glancing around nervously. That's when I saw it. The shadow from the asylum. The thing that had been following me was here. It emerged from the darkness, its form twisting and shifting, impossible to fully comprehend. The room fell silent except for the hum of the equipment and the soft, guttural sound emanating from the shadow. The intruders froze, their weapons aimed but useless. The shadow moved toward them, and they began to scream, high-pitched, primal wails of terror. One by one, they dropped their weapons and collapsed, clutching their heads as if something was tearing through their minds. I backed away, horrified, as the shadow turned toward me. Its eyes, if you could call them that, eyes like shiny alamos lit the apartment, and I felt the same suffocating sensation I'd experienced in the asylum. "You have seen what lies beyond," it said, its voice echoing in my mind. "What will you do with this knowledge?" I glanced at the upload, which was nearly complete. The files would go live in moments, revealing everything we'd uncovered to the world. But I hesitated. "What happens if I release it?" I asked, my voice trembling. The shadow loomed closer. "The veil exists to protect. To lift it is to invite chaos. Are you prepared for what will follow?" My mind raced. The people who had suffered in the Hollow Veil Project deserved justice, and the world deserved the truth. But what if the shadow was right? What if revealing this knowledge caused more harm than good? Before I could decide, the progress bar reached 100%. The files were uploaded, sent to dozens of platforms and encrypted servers. It was done. The shadow recoiled, its form flickering. The bunker shook violently, as if the very fabric of reality were tearing apart. My ally grabbed my arm, pulling me toward the exit. "We have to go," he shouted. We ran through the collapsing bunker, the shadow's presence fading behind us. As we emerged into the forest, the ground beneath us rumbled, and the bunker imploded, disappearing into a cloud of dust and debris. Over the next few days, the files spread like wildfire. News outlets, social media platforms, and independent researchers dissected the information, uncovering the horrifying truth about the Hollow Veil Project. The public's reaction was a mix of outrage, fear, and disbelief. Protests erupted worldwide, demanding accountability from the governments and organizations involved. But there were also unintended consequences. Some people became obsessed with the idea of breaching the veil, viewing it as a pathway to power. Others descended into paranoia, convinced the entities beyond the veil were coming for them. As for me, I disappeared. My ally and I went our separate ways, each trying to stay off the radar. I changed my name, moved to a remote town, and lived in constant fear of retaliation from the Watchers, the Shadow, or even the entities beyond the veil. But I couldn't escape the knowledge of what I'd seen. Late at night, when the world was quiet, I'd replay the events in my mind, questioning whether I'd made the right choice. If you're hearing this now, it means I've taken another risk by sharing my story. The truth is out there, but so are the dangers. The veil exists for a reason, and while we may have lifted it, the question remains: was it worth it? Stay curious, but stay vigilant. Some doors, once opened, can never be closed.